Okay, is everybody ready to go? Everybody good?
I guess so.
Okay, let's get started.
Great. Thanks. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thanks for being with us this afternoon. We're super happy to be here to share some insights. And as you said just before, we're going to have 15 minutes to discuss on what makes a great and mature ecosystem in Japan, of course, and with the eyes and perspective of foreigners. And obviously and hopefully, I'm not alone today. I'm in a good company surrounded with great entrepreneurs and investors. And we're going to start with a quick round of intro. Tina, you go first. Who are you? What is your background?
Hi, everyone. My name is Tina. I'm the managing partner of Cherubic Ventures. So we're a C-stage VC investing into early-stage company globally. And I'm also the proud investor of two fabulous Japanese companies, Sam from Habito and Russell from Paidy.
Thanks, Tina. Sam?
Hi, everyone. My name is Sam Giotti. I am the co-founder, chief executive of Habito. I spent about 20 years at the intersection of tech and finance, and I'm really excited to actually be here as a foreign entrepreneur from Singapore, but with an operating unit here. Looking forward to the conversation.
Great, and thanks everybody. My name is Russell Kummer. So I'm the founder and executive chairman of Paidy. So Paidy, I've been a fintech entrepreneur in Japan for a long time. Paidy raised, I think it was over $300 million US from both Japanese and international investors. We became a unicorn in 2021, and then we sold the business to PayPal for 300 billion yen at the end of 2021 in the largest venture M&A exit in Japanese history. I look forward to sharing our experience here with you. Not only am I a foreigner as the founder of Paidy, but our company is also extremely diverse. We have more than 35 different nationalities that work for us in our office in Tokyo and elsewhere. So I look forward to learning from the panel and sharing our journey as well as foreigners building in Japan. Thank you.
Thanks. So we have some deep fintech expertise on the stage today, so that's really cool. Well, we're in Osaka today. Can you just share your first connection with Japan? How come you're around?
My firm, Cherubic Ventures, we invest in US and also in Asia. And I think when I first joined the firm back in 2014, there were actually quite a few startup events in Japan. So I remember I would come to Tokyo, Fukuoka, to attend these events. And obviously later on, our company, we're very fortunate to invest in Russell, Paidy. And then I think that's kind of our first connection to the Japanese startup ecosystem.
Sam?
I've been coming to Japan for a number of years, pre-COVID, and I guess in my previous life as a general partner, because there were actually a lot of investors here in Japan that were looking to deploy capital in emerging fintech ecosystem across the world. And then lately, I'm back in Japan with Habito, my new startup, again in the fintech space, because of two fundamental reasons. One is because Japan is a really, really large market, very hard to crack. Maybe we'll talk a little bit more as to why it is so hard to crack, but an incredibly exciting market, particularly from a financial services perspective, I think largely untapped. The second reason is because the regulator, the JFSA, has started to really unlock some of the key components that make startup ecosystem in fintech a lot more efficient and effective, with a couple of really interesting new licenses, one of which we have applied for, called New Intermediary License. And I think the combination of a very large market where the JFSA opening up from a regulatory perspective will pave the way for new companies, for new startups like us.
Yeah, nice. So I'm Canadian, but I grew up in Singapore and Hong Kong. I came to Japan for the first time about 20 years ago to work for Goldman Sachs. I had started my career in Hong Kong with Merrill Lynch, and like everybody here, I was attracted to Japan for a number of reasons. Size, opportunity, lifestyle, food, all of the good stuff. So for me, my journey in Japan, as I say, started as a salaryman at Goldman Sachs. And then I sort of realized that actually, before fintech was even really a word, that Japan was really unique in terms of its size and the opportunities to go and try and do some innovation in financial services. And I was always struck by how few teams there were trying to build businesses in Japan. It felt like in America, every good idea had 10 well-funded teams. It felt, this is now sort of 15 years ago, it felt at that time that it was only, one or two opportunities were being pursued by anybody. So I started my company in 2008 and was really always inspired just by how big a business you can build, even as a domestic-only business. Although obviously, Japan is also a great place to sort of build expertise and technology and build a global business, as we've seen with our other successful startup brethren. But my journey started sort of professionally, and sort of really my blossoming as an entrepreneur was really all here. And it's a huge credit to the market and the opportunities that are here that I was able to do that, and I'm still here now. So there.
Great. So thanks, guys. So now let's have a focus on the current Japanese ecosystem, on the current ecosystem for startups. So any ecosystem that wants to thrive has to attract talent, entrepreneurs, foreign entrepreneurs, and investors. And the Japanese government recently announced that there's a need of regulation, that the government is removing some key restrictions on domestic VCs so they can invest in any types of company above the 50% threshold, so they can invest in international and Japanese startups. It's a way, maybe, and I guess, to attract foreign LPs, foreign limited partners, so you will get an influx of capital on the local ecosystem. So to give you the full context, there are different ways to assess the health, the quality of a startup ecosystem, and there is one which is to look at the fundraising value. And we prepared a slide so we can also compare Japan to other big tech ecosystems. So let's share the slide. Up, not this one, this one. So here on this slide, we're comparing Japan to other big tech hubs, the US and China, obviously, but also Singapore and the biggest European tech startups hubs, like the UK, France, and Germany. So it's really interesting to see where Japan stands, and also the old trends. If you look 7 years ago, for example, I'm French, so I love to compare France versus other ecosystems. Japan and France were kind of similar in terms of fundraising value, in terms of size. Seven years ago, it's kind of flat. So you can also see the old trends. Like if you look at Europe, for example, now France is above Berlin, Paris is above Berlin, the UK is still way above. So it's always interesting to see what happened over the past 7 years. Singapore is so impressive in terms of fundraising value as well. I don't know if you have any comments on these ecosystems. Tina, you worked on different ecosystems. I guess you know the US, you know China well.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Any comments on the growths and trends?
Yeah, I think the past 10, 15 years has been a golden age for investor investing into tech startup, right? Unicorn is also a new term that we use to describe startups that are valued over $1 billion, right? And now we have a lot of them. And I think it used to be like U.S. and China being have the most capital and the most talents, and especially the U.S. We hear all this, all the tech companies like Google, Microsoft, Facebook, they're all coming out of the U.S. and obviously they're the powerhouse when it comes to investing into tech startups. But I do think that trend is also slowly changing. I think now a big theme is startup can come from anywhere. It can be very global. And that's why even a US investor, it used to be investor in Silicon Valley, they will only invest in companies that are also in the U.S. or in Silicon Valley. But now they're very likely to invest in company that's outside of the U.S. If you look at YC, which is a very famous startup accelerator, now half of their batch are not from the U.S., right? From India, emerging markets, from Japan, from everywhere in the world. So the investing trend, is really changing, even though, maybe U.S. still the primary activity was happening. But I do see this, it's already spreading globally, yeah.
So bear in mind, these figures depends on sometimes the sources, but at least you have the global view, another view on the old trends. So getting back to what the Japanese government announced, like removing some key restrictions on domestic VCs to see maybe an increase of investment. So do you think, I know Russell, that you will get an influx of capital?
So I think there's two things that I would say. I think that, look, our experience, we raised hundreds of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions from Japanese institutions, from Japanese VCs, from US VCs, from US institutions. Like we kind of have done that whole thing. Now, obviously, it's not easy to do, but it's definitely doable. And I do think in general, funding is available for good teams and good ideas. And I think what's more important, actually, and which is thematic with what we're doing here at Hack Osaka, is really like true ecosystems where you have really knowledgeable, not just founders, but investors, advisors, angel investors who themselves have been successful founders, or VCs that were successful founders, I do think is important. So without sort of overemphasizing the specifics of this rule change, for me, what I can see would be valuable is if this leads to either better networks or better sort of knowledge, for want of a better term, amongst investors, because they're now getting exposure as Japanese investors to global companies or global ideas. I do think that pays dividends back in Japan in the local ecosystem, because then you end up with investors who've had exposure to the way that business is done elsewhere, or other bigger ideas, or maybe different jurisdictions where people have greater ability to scale, or maybe it's a place where they're global from the beginning because it's actually a very small jurisdiction, or different technology or whatever. So I think for me, the kind of optimistic spin on this rule change would be if it leads to more skilled investors as a kind of a group or class in Japan. I think that's a huge benefit for Japan. I mean, we sometimes as an entrepreneur you think, VCs they're rapacious. They want to take your stock. They're not going to help. And there are some that are good and some that are bad. But really, just like the right early employees make a huge difference, the right early investors can really help an entrepreneur along. And it's nothing to do with money. Really, money is, by definition, fungible. What's really different is, can you mentor? Can you coach? Are you credible? No offense to people that for example, work in the CVC arm of a large corporation. I had many of you as my investors. That's great, but it's not the same on the human level as somebody who can say, well, I made and lost $100 million in the first internet bubble. Let me tell you what it was like for me emotionally. Let me tell you how I recovered from that. So this setback that you're having in your business, be it a deal that fails, or a key employee that quits, or any of these bumps along the way. Actually, this is a very human business. I mean, I like your slide. That's great. It's a very inhuman slide. It's just the money piece. Like, exactly, yeah. The human piece is super important. And I think that if the human capital in this space gets better, that's only to the benefit of the whole space and ultimately to all of us. I don't know. Sorry, long answer, but yeah.
Oh, it was a great one. Yeah, there are like different metrics to consider, and not just the regulation. So the VC profiles who are behind it. And,
yeah.
Okay. Sam, you want to?
I have a slightly different perspective on this lifting of the cap for domestic VCs, and as a former investor myself, investors are rational when they think about capital allocation and where to deploy money. And so it suggests to me that local VCs struggle somehow to deploy amount of money in Japan. And that suggests that perhaps they see opportunities to create better multiples outside of Japan. Now, so this rule seems to me, it facilitates mostly LPs, limited partners, when they actually invest in domestic investors. Hopefully, to your point, Russell, maybe longer term, it will facilitate a greater diversity of capital that comes into Japan, and also not just from a quantitative perspective, but also in terms of the quality of the capital, right? In the early days, I worked in many ecosystems, particularly from a fintech perspective, in London, in New York, in Dubai, in Singapore. So now I'm experiencing Japan as an entrepreneur, and it does feel, emerging. That's how I would probably qualify it, and the numbers suggest it. Even Singapore, which is a place that I know particularly well, not only has more capital and more venture investors and entrepreneurs on a per capita basis, but I think it's also the quality and the sophistication that is a little different. This comes with time, right? Because building an ecosystem is a labor of love, right? It takes a long time. It takes a decade or longer, right? And you have to sort of affect it systemically. It's not just capital, it's not just talent, they're very important, but you need to think about the regulatory framework, you need to think about the support systems, you need to think about the partnerships, you need to think about education. So, and everything needs to work at once. So it is actually quite complex to make it work in my experience, and I think that as I see the initial sort of sprouts here in Japan of interest, certainly here in Osaka, in Tokyo as well, the initial signals are positive.
So your experience in Japan, the fintech ecosystem here. So what is, from your perspective, the reality of building a company here?
Say it again?
What is your point of view on how you can build a company in Japan? I mean, it's kind of fresh for you.
It is very fresh, and thank you for asking the question. I think it would be naive for me to say that it is the same as other countries that I have been working. It is hard, and it is hard on many levels. I think Hiroshi in the previous panel sort of mentioned language barriers, and that is a reality. Most global entrepreneurs speak English, and here the majority of people don't. So there's a natural language barrier that is really impacting sort of communication, which in turn impact how you build the talent and the skills, of portfolio of skills and attitude that you want in your team. It's harder, and I'm happy to sort of wax lyrical on some of the examples, but it's harder also to set it up purely from an administrative perspective, right? Raising capital in Japan is harder than in other geographies, but it is possible. And to Russell's point, there is capital here in Japan that can be readily deployed. And I think the most powerful combination, certainly from an early stage entrepreneur, is to attract global capital as a combination of both local money as well as global money. So we are an example of that. I mean, we wouldn't be existing, without having foreign entrepreneurs, foreign investors investing in our seed round and our pre-A round.
Right. And Tina, same question on on the investor side. So what is the reality of investment in Japan? I mean, you invested in 2 startups from Japan. Can you share to everyone here how you approached these deals?
So for us, the way, as an early stage fund, the way we do our investments is, we prioritize, companies that are referred to us by, within our trusted network. So when we first, invested in Russell back in the days, it was actually referred by one of our close friends. And we had, I think, maybe a couple calls with Russell, and we just like him instantly. This is going to be a unicorn. That's how we made the investment. So, and then fast forward, obviously Russell introduced us to Sam, and usually great founders, they like to hang out together, right? So when a unicorn founder introduces to another company, we are very likely to invest, right? So that's kind of how we make our investment in Japan. And I think to answer your broader question about some observation from a foreign investor to the Japanese startup ecosystem, right? I think, I agree to Sam's point, there's definitely, for a foreign investor, there's definitely language barrier, right? If you go to the US, Singapore, Hong Kong, or other places, most founders, they do speak, and they want to speak to you in English, right? But then here it's a little bit different. So there is a little bit of that language and cultural differences. And I think, also just the perception of Japan is a great country, but however, I think people also have this perception of, people here are also more conservative, right? So maybe they're less risk-taking. And that could be, obviously there's good things about that, but then for a startup, if you're building a startup, you have to be extremely risk-taking. So I think that also kind of affects how investors view Japan as a country with, the potential of startups. So it seems like it's a little bit less attractive maybe compared to other markets. But I do think, times are changing, and now we do see there's opportunity for Japan. I mean, if you look at, the past few years, there's been so many changes in the world. And for example, like China, right? It's been very volatile, right? Due to the geopolitical tensions, due to their own COVID, their zero COVID policy. It's very stringent on the tech companies there, and including their own government cracking down on their tech company. And so investors are actually pulling out of China, right? But then they still need to deploy money. So a lot of that capital are actually coming into Japan. And also a lot of the startup actually choosing to expand into Japan as well. So I do see a lot of interest and demand in the Japanese market in the past few years.
Great, so many opportunities ahead.
Yeah. I would add a little too. If you my experience is not as fresh, so forgive me, but it's definitely getting better. I would say advantages here. Regulation is pretty clear and doesn't change. So it might, at least changes slowly. So at least there's some little surety, right? Rule of law, very important. Actually, it's getting easier and easier to recruit people as a startup. Again, sort of 12 or 13 years ago, it might have been harder to get visas for skilled people, but I think that there really is this view that skilled immigration is important, so that's easier to do, which is great. And look, I would also say to entrepreneurs out here, I think the language barrier thing is real, and actually everybody here that's an entrepreneur or thinking about it, there are simple steps that you can take. Even if your English is not perfect, that doesn't matter. By the way, my Japanese is not perfect either, so it is what it is. But simple things like, when you're fundraising, are your docs only in Japanese? Or do you have an English make it easy for investors who like you and like your idea and like your vision to follow through and invest. So, there's whatever the JKISS notes you can do in English, whatever, all of that stuff, I think that's also important for people to kind of bear in mind and think about. It's not just, are you compelling in a pitch in English or Japanese, but are you making, all of this business is about removing reasons to say no. When you're hiring somebody to join your team, you're removing the reasons for them to say no to join your company. When you're selling to a big or small partner, you're just getting rid of the reasons for them to say no and not do business with you. Same story for investors. So I would really say, for us, when we were raising money, 15 years ago, it was very hard to raise money in a Japanese entity, right? We had to have a Cayman entity, blah, 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 all that other stuff. There's now much more comfort with investing in Japanese entities directly, but make it easy on yourself by not requiring that the universe of investors that you can speak to is limited only to people who have lawyers who are happy doing Japanese docs. Think about what a small group of people that is. You can have exactly the same access to capital, exactly the same investor protections, whatever you want, whatever cap structure you want. Just do it in English if you can, and then you create all of this optionality for yourself in future rounds.
I actually wanted to sort of comment on that specifically because one of our choices at the very, very beginning was where do we incorporate?
Right.
Which jurisdiction do we pick and why? And so we ended up incorporating in Holdco in Singapore, but our OpCo, our operating entity, is here in Japan. So we're a rather unique setup where all of our business is in Japan. We're native Japanese business. We're a product, the team, the infrastructure, the partners, everything is natively Japanese. But for similar reasons, we ended up sort of setting up our Holdco in Singapore because we thought it would be easier to collect capital globally from Singapore, much easier jurisdiction to deal with. And actually, even the Japanese investors that have invested in us, both in the seed and the pre-A round, actually ended up investing in Singapore. So if there had been a different option here, but it wasn't, I would have probably considered it.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, sorry, until you've done it, you don't think about it. Like the other thing is there's just not that much talent necessarily in the legal space of venture. Again, my experience 15 years ago,
same.
like every deal in Asia was either a Cayman deal or a Delaware deal, because every investor just had comfort that those two jurisdictions would work. Now it's obviously changing over time, but like again, you as an entrepreneur, okay, figure all of that out. That just only creates more optionality for you, and that's basically your job as a founder, is basically, holding your vision, but just basically creating options so that you can, achieve it. Anyway, sorry. I'm talking too much.
No, go ahead, please. That's the whole purpose. You're here to share your amazing experience. So you said this slide is really cold. I agree with you because we only mentioned figures and fundraising. So I want you to follow the discussion on human capital, on the talent pool. I mean, talent pool is key if you want to build a business. And I have another slide I want to show you. Is this figure. To show how attractive an ecosystem can be. And so in this slide, you see that 1% of the founders in Japan are coming from abroad. And we love to compare this figure to a big hub in the region, in the area, Singapore, where 27% roughly of entrepreneurs are foreigners. So the 1% are maybe on stage today. So yesterday you told me there are like 3 types of entrepreneurs in Japan. Can you share your thoughts on this?
Yeah. I mean, it was a bit sort of tongue-in-cheek kind of comment, but there's I've observed here in Japan 3 kinds of entrepreneurs. There's local, born-bred Japanese entrepreneurs, and they represent about, I would say, 99% of the base. There's about 0.99999%, which is people that have been in Japan, they're foreigner, but have been in Japan for a period of time, and somehow they started to sort of Japanize, get the hang of the culture, the language, the ways of doing business. And I think, Russell, you're a great example of that. Your experience, before in banking at Goldman Sachs, you've been on the ground for a few years, certainly before setting up the business. And then there's like the 0.0000001%, which currently I represent, but I'm hoping that there'll be more, which is people that come from abroad, people that kind of see Japan as a next destination market with huge opportunities for innovation, for new products, and the challenges of coming in as a as an entrepreneur from abroad with somewhat little connections on, in Japan, were a little scary to begin with, and we needed to be quite scrappy, right? To kind of come in and figure out how to set up a business, or who to talk to, why to talk to certain people, not others, who can help us, where do we go for subsidies, who are reliable lawyers that we can work with, and the list is very, very long, including, where do we go and hire a team? I mean, now about 60% of my team is actually Japanese native. The rest is foreigners, so we are really a bit of a melting pot, if you like, as a business. And I personally take a lot of pride in sort of, trying to create a really diverse team from the get-go, because I think this is hugely important. But again, bringing talent into Japan, and there's a lot of talent in the world around tech and design and product, which is a skill that is very, very thinly available in Japan. It's very hard to kind of convince them to come to Japan for a variety of reasons, notwithstanding the food. I hope to see many more people, like in Singapore, about 30% of entrepreneurs are, not local, right?
So where do you think the Japanese ecosystem is regarding its ability to attract foreign entrepreneurs?
Yeah, so look, our experience has been that it's quite doable to recruit really high quality people to come if you pitch it the right way. I mean, as I said, we have 35 nationalities with us. We also have people that are in 11 different countries. So obviously COVID has also meant that every company is kind of hybrid. You have people that are with you, people that are in their own countries. I do think it's getting easier, as I said. And I think Sam is right. Look, I was here, but if you were we talk about this with Tina, places like Taiwan, not big. So Taiwanese companies might look to the Japanese market for expansion. Yep. Obviously, there's the very famous story between Kakao and Line. Kakao Talk won in Korea. Line came to Japan. Obviously, Japan's a much bigger market, better to, or just bigger. So I think that there probably will be more and more, to be very honest. I think as people think about lifestyle, and I think even honestly through COVID, it's a credit to Japan. No offense to our friend. I was born in Singapore, so I'm allowed to say things about Singapore and elsewhere. And I'm a Hong Kong permanent resident, so I can say bad things about Hong Kong too. I was much happier being in Japan through COVID because of the approach that was a little bit more sort of, let's call it, less hysterical. And we could do still all sorts of things through that 2020, 21, 22 kind of period. And I think people care about lifestyle. I think that matters. I think life is short. You should have adventures. And I think Japan, from a kind of, soft power perception, more people know Mario than know Mickey Mouse. And that's really something quite amazing. And we've been able to leverage that to have engineers from South America, from Southeast Asia, from Eastern and Western Europe come and build great products, work with smart people, but also enjoy whatever, anime and owl cafes and whatever else floats their boat. But yeah, look, it's a big market, guys. It's still so big, right? To your point, don't forget, Japan has been the world's largest creditor nation for 31 years. The money
read the same
is.
Article.
Say again, sorry.
We read the same article.
Yeah. No, but it's really true.
It's true.
And Japanese people are still very wealthy, and they like good quality products that are. Now it's hard. It's very hard to build as they're very discerning. Kuchikomi really matters, right? But if you can do it, it's definitely worth the effort. And the sky is really the limit. There's no reason you have to be just in Japan if you start here. And the talent is here, the food is here, the opportunity is here. So maybe more people will see that message and take the same leap that Sam and others have done.
Back to the cool processes like the visa experience. So when you're coming from abroad, you want to launch a business, of course you can have access to a business visa that lasts a year, if I'm not mistaken. You're in the middle of it. Can you share your experience?
Yeah, so obviously the visa process is essential when you're coming from abroad. You set up a business. It's probably not the very first thing that you need to do. First, you need to set up the business in the first place, which also is a little bit complicated. And I just want to sort of mention one fact before I go back to the visa example, because I think this is actually an opportunity for improvement, because it's not difficult, but when we set up the business, the OPCO here in Japan, we actually set it up in Tokyo. This actually happened during COVID, so it was a little hard for us to realize that there isn't actually an online system where you can actually set up a business directly online, which exists in most other places. So it took us about 5 weeks for that process. And again, because we're non-native, we actually worked with a legal firm to help us through the process. What we don't know what we don't know. And it cost us about $10,000. So maybe somebody local can do it faster and cheaper than we did, right? I accept that. But as a foreigner coming in, it was the only way that we could set up the business with the certainty that we would have a structure where investors would be happy and willing to invest in. But for comparison, when we set up the holdco in Singapore, it took us 48 hours and we spent about $99. And when I did it in the UK, this I'm talking about already, I don't know, maybe a decade ago, it's a 24-hour process and it cost 49 pounds, right? So it's possible to create, just this is a very simple example, very, very simple, the barriers for entry can actually be quite hard if you're non-native, right? The visa then comes later. So obviously if you're an entrepreneur, you set up the business, you try to come to the country and then to hire people. There are a variety of visa processes here. It would be, for example, a lot easier to have, for example, a golden visa for entrepreneurs and their teams to come maybe 3 to 5 years. Instead, there's different types of visa. They're quite short, about a year long or so. Then you need to move on to something else, and the process is not particularly simple. But we made it. So we went through it, and it's just through the process of going through this that we realized actually it could be made a little easier, and there would be more people, I'm sure, that with this simple steps would be more incentivized to come.
Great. So a question for all of you on this attractiveness challenge. What are the metrics the Japanese government should look at to measure its ability to attract entrepreneurs and foreigners? So we had this percentage, we have the fundraising value. Do you have any other metrics we should look at to see if the local ecosystem is going to the next level?
I think definitely, the fundraising activities, right? The round size, evaluation, number of company founded. But I think more importantly, maybe, I think something that, because we're talking about, what does it take to build a successful startup ecosystem, and we talk about funding, talents, ease of business setting up. But I think one thing also very important is like success story, right? Because I think that's very powerful illustration of, what is possible. For example, like Russell, like Patty now is a prime example of success founders, and is a foreigner who started a company here a long time ago. And I think that's so encouraging, right? And that's why Sam is here. And I think, one successful company's exit story can attract so many, foreigners. And I will share, like Taiwan, we have our first, startup exit, successful exit is actually in Japan, right? It's an advertising company called Appier, and they went public during the pandemic. and it's now valued at $1 billion or $1.5 billion. So it's a great success story. And now a bunch of Taiwanese companies, they wanted to come to Japan and expand here and go public here. And now Taiwanese VC also want to come here. So I think having more of these stories that you can share, and it instantly creates confidence in this ecosystem, and it will attract more people because they believe, hey, they can do it, and they're not even Japanese, and they were able to pull it off, so I can do it too. So I think if we have more of these cases, and those founders are so willing to share, right, what they've been through. So I think if we have more of that, then I think it will be a great help.
Right.
I wanted to just maybe add one comment, which links back to what Russell said at the very, very start, which I completely agree. And it's around sort of the human capital and the value of sort of bringing people into an ecosystem. I would say one metric that I've noticed across most other ecosystems consistently as a leading indicator of the health of the ecosystem and the speed of development of the ecosystem is the percentage of graduates that aspire to be entrepreneurs, right? And this is not about money. It's actually about how you think about taking control of your life. And in particular, I think here in Japan, this metric would probably be juxtaposed to people that instead finish their university and they hope to be, starting to work for large corporations and be there for their lifetime. So that is really a cultural a change in the cultural zeitgeist, right? Yeah. Countries and ecosystems that do that, they see a consistent uptake in terms of entrepreneurial activity.
Well, exactly. I mean, if you look at France 10 years ago, France was really similar to Japan. Now, if you look at surveys among students, vast majority of them aspire to launch a business. But it's kind of new for the French culture as well. Mm-hmm. Last topic, last section, we're in 2023. Here's a kind of economic downturn. I don't know if you saw that. I'm curious about your thoughts on what you're seeing right now in the ecosystem in terms of trends, in terms of investments. Tina, I don't know if you were looking at specific topics this year as an investor, so not only in Japan, but worldwide. Are you looking at generative AI, for example, or impact, or?
I think obviously generative AI is very hot right now. And I think, currently some other really popular investment theses include ESG, anything that helps climate change, right? Helps the environment is very popular. I think software is tech is still very attractive. And even though we're at a downturn for crypto, but I think a lot of investors are still very curious about our crypto. So that's also another interesting thesis that's still ongoing.
So are you an investor right now?
Yeah, I am. So I think there's two things, and maybe it all kind of draws together. I echo Sam's idea. I think ecosystems are, I look forward to people that have graduated from Paidy starting their own companies. There are a number of them. I think that's great. I'd love to be involved if it makes sense and it's helpful. And then obviously there's just other different investments you can make. All of that stuff I think makes a lot of sense. What I want to say to everybody here about where we are in terms of the cycle, I think all of the best companies get started in the worst environments. Yeah. So Paidy was incorporated in March of 2008. So it's right in the sort of getting ready for the global financial crisis. But it's good. It teaches you a lot of things. It teaches, hopefully you're pursuing the right idea. Paidy, by the way, was a pivot. We were doing something else first, and then we pivoted into Paidy, which happens a lot. But we sort of understood that we were close, if not exactly right, but we were in financial services. So I would say, look, I don't think people should be shy. I think as Tina mentions, that thematically there are so many interesting things coming, Web3, whatever, AI, blah, 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 choose your buzzword, but all of those things are there. And it's maybe not a disaster that actually things are not as frothy as they were in, let's say, 2021. It's probably not bad for you as an entrepreneur. I mean, if you're exactly a very intelligent young man or woman that is leaving a big company, or just right out of university and you have a great idea that you want to build with your friends, you don't have kids or a mortgage yet, so it doesn't matter, right? You'll just learn how to build and sell and persevere, and the people that go through that will have a little bit more mettle and commitment when the good times do return, and they always do. I mean, that's the nature. You can have some argument about fiat currencies and business cycles, whatever. I mean, but no, I think there's no time like the present, and actually, really great companies will be forged in these hard times, and humans still have problems that they want to solve. Japanese people still want to use new services and will happily, pay for them, all of these other good things. So I don't think it's a bad time. I think it is going to be harder to raise. That's fine. I think valuations are not going to be where they were. Look at where valuations are in public markets now. So that's just the new reality. That's awesome. That's the game you're now going to play when you're building your company from 2023. So, game on.
Sam, do you experience some challenges this year or over the past few months because of the supposed economic downturn, or is it just business as usual?
Absolutely. Whenever there's a downturn, you may rest assured there'll be an upturn, and off we go. And these are cycles, right? So, especially for those, like a few of us have been through, a few decades, this happens all the time. So I'm certainly very upbeat about what's coming up next. And I think that we're starting to see some interesting flags that suggest that the worst seems to be over in the US in terms of inflation, and there's a little bit more, I would say, optimism, cautious optimism from investors, not just in venture, generally speaking. And so, this sort of ripples effect from public markets into private markets. And I'm starting to see investors, particularly outside of Japan, beginning to look at Japan with renewed interest. And I think this is really, really exciting. So I mentioned at the very beginning, I'm the proof point that global capital is interested in deploying money in Japan. I wouldn't exist otherwise, right? And so I think the 2023 and beyond, I think, will be certainly not as easy as 2021, but 2021 was the exception, right?
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward with, I guess, with great enthusiasm, particularly because we're launching our product in Q2 this year. So please come, and if you're interested in trying the product, habito.com, put your name down on our soft launch list.
Nice. Can't wait to see the launch. So Russell, when we had a discussion earlier and yesterday on, like you were giving some tips for Japanese entrepreneurs, like look at other ecosystems, look at other successes, and maybe trying to find a kind of Japanese way to launch a business here.
Yeah, I think, the observation was, and I think this is exactly the same theme, like global investors do like Japan, and for all kinds of reasons. And I do think that, if you, in my experience, so Paidy is what you would call a BNPL service. So it was easy for us to have a conversation where we would say, okay, BNPL is understood as a business model in the US and Europe and elsewhere. So business model risk and sort of business rationale is understood by the investor base. Japan is a big and attractive market, so market risk they were comfortable with. So then you're only really dealing with your ability to execute as a founder and entrepreneur. And I think that's probably true for other businesses here, right? I mean, you don't have to always invent something entirely new to add value. You can bring, the Japanese version or your take on other proven international business models And believe me, the capital will be there to support you if you're doing that well and other people believe in that vision. And because market risk is understood and business model risk is understood, and then it's really just down to you to go and build it. So yeah, I think there's a tremendous number of opportunities that still remain in Japan, without a doubt.
Well, that's the conclusion, the best one. Big thank you to all of you. Please join me in thanking our panelists. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks all.